Dear friends, today we are about to tell you a story that will not only touch your heart, but will also make you think deeply. This story is from a village where an imam of a mosque committed a heinous act with an orphan girl, and as a result, Allah sent a punishment upon the village, which served as a lesson for all. People began to repent in front of the imam, saying, Toba astaghfirullah. So stay with us until the end to learn the full details of this incident. In a village, there lived a widow with her 8-year-old daughter. The widow struggled to make ends meet and did housework for people to earn a living. She was a very pious and virtuous woman, but she had limited resources for education. After the death of her husband, she couldn't send her daughter to school, but she still wished that her daughter would learn the Quran. That's why she took her daughter to the imam of the mosque to request that he teach her Quran. It was a strange day. The widow, holding her daughter's hand, was walking towards the mosque, and the daughter was stopping every step as if some sorrow was hidden in her heart. She wanted to tell her mother something, but she remained silent. When they reached the mosque's door, the daughter suddenly pulled away from her mother's hand and said, "Mother, I don't want to go. I don't want to study with the imam." The widow, angry, replied, "Why don't you want to go? Don't you want to learn the Quran? This is very important for you. I am enduring all these hardships to make you a good person." The daughter heard her mother's words, but her heart was telling her something else. She wanted her mother to allow her to do something else, but she was helpless. Something inside her was telling her that there was a reason not to go to the imam. She wanted to understand, but she couldn't. In anger, the widow grabbed her daughter's hand and took her inside the mosque. As they neared the door, an eerie silence fell. The imam's face, which had always shown kindness, now appeared ominous. The girl felt a strange shiver, as if something was wrong. Her eyes were fixed on the imam's face, and she felt as though he knew her inner thoughts, as though he could sense the fear hidden deep inside her. Her heart was racing, but she couldn't say anything. She only felt ashamed in her mother's eyes. The imam's gaze instilled deep fear in the girl. As they entered the mosque, the imam scanned the girl from head to toe, and in a low voice he said, "From today, you will start learning the Quran here." His voice had a coldness to it that made the girl feel even more confused. A wave of fear swept through the girl's eyes, but she couldn't say a word. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "My dear, today marks the beginning of a new chapter in your life," and then went on with her own work. As they were about to leave, the girl's heart was filled with uncertainty. Had the imam understood her feelings? Would he take care of her? Or was something else going to happen? She had many questions, but they remained buried inside her. The girl's tears kept flowing as she stood near the mosque. She wanted to tell her mother, "I don't want to learn from the imam. He's not a good man." But her mother didn't pay attention to her fears. She thought the girl was just making excuses not to study. Pulling the girl by the hand, she took her inside the mosque. In the village, there was a small mosque where the imam used to teach Quran to children. When the imam saw the orphan girl crying, he glared at her. The girl became frightened, and tears started to roll down her face. Her mother, seeing her tears, said to the imam, "Imam, please tell my daughter how important it is to study the Quran. I am exhausted from her stubbornness." The imam looked at the girl, then at the mother and said, "After teaching the children today, I will keep her here for an hour and explain to her the importance of learning the Quran." The girl became even more frightened upon hearing this. Her mother handed her daughter's hand over to the imam and left the mosque. The widow worked in people's homes, cleaning dishes and utensils. After that, the orphan girl became silent, scared of every little noise. She would sleep with her mother, often murmuring in her sleep, "Imam, please don't do this to me. For the sake of Allah, don't do this to me." Her mother, however, thought the imam was just scolding her, which is why she was acting this way. But the truth was far different. The girl had become terrified of the imam's actions. She would return late from the mosque, always going straight to her room and crying. Her mother, thinking the imam was scolding her, would pray to Allah, "Oh Allah, please make my daughter passionate about learning the Quran." One day the girl didn't come home from the mosque, and the mother thought the imam must have been explaining the importance of the Quran to her, which is why she was late. She thought the girl would return soon, but when she didn't, the mother went to check. As she reached the mosque, she saw a man closing the door. She saw him and asked, "Why hasn't my daughter returned home?" The man's face was pale as he replied, "Your daughter passed by me just now, but she hasn't reached home yet." "What's going on?" Hearing this, the mother's heart trembled. "Why hasn't my daughter come home yet?" she asked. The man said, "Go inside the mosque and ask the imam about your daughter." The man's face was visibly anxious, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look, no one is in the mosque. You should go to the imam's house and ask him where your daughter is." The widow, extremely worried about her daughter, went to the imam's house. His wife opened the door and said, "The imam hasn't come home yet. After teaching the children at the mosque, he goes to the village leader's house to teach more children." The widow's heart sank upon hearing this. She was deeply distressed. When she reached her home, she was met with a horrifying sight. Her daughter, lying there with disheveled hair, was barely breathing. There were bruises on her face. Seeing this, the widow's heart was filled with dark thoughts. She hurriedly embraced her daughter and cried, "My child, what happened to you? Did someone hurt you?" With great difficulty, the daughter nodded and weakly said, "The imam did this to me." Tears filled her eyes as she took her last breaths in her mother's arms. The widow now understood why her daughter had refused to go to the mosque. She held her daughter tightly and cried, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her daughter was already dead in her arms. The widow, now out of her mind with grief, screamed in anguish. Her cries were so loud that neighbors and villagers gathered in her home. No one could believe that a happy, playful child had been taken by death. Some stared at the lifeless child, while others looked at the widow who had lost her sanity. Her face was pale with shock, and she had realized that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Wrapped in a shroud, the innocent child lay still. The entire village had gathered at the widow's house, gossiping among themselves. That poor, innocent girl went to the mosque to study the Quran, but someone took advantage of her on the way and left her to die, they said. The widow, still crying, overheard the villagers' words. She then stood up, determined. "I know who did this to my daughter. I will make sure he faces justice. I will get justice for my child," she said through tears. Everyone turned to look at the imam, who had just entered the house. The widow's eyes turned red with rage. She ran and grabbed the imam by his collar. The villagers, shocked, tried to pull her off, saying, "How can you do this to the imam?" The widow, screaming and crying, said, "This man is the one who killed my daughter, who assaulted her and then left her to die. If I had known he was a beast, I would never have sent my daughter to study with him." The villagers were stunned. The imam had always been seen as a righteous man. No one could ever have imagined him committing such a crime. He was well respected throughout the village. The imam was in shock, unable to fathom how the truth had come out so quickly. Seeing the widow's fury, the villagers began to question him, but many were still in disbelief. "My daughters also study with the imam. Nothing like this has ever happened before," some villagers defended him. The widow fell silent as no one supported her. The villagers, too, remained passive, unsure whether to believe her or not. The next day, the widow went to the village leader's house crying. After a long wait, the leader finally agreed to listen to her. She told him everything. The leader, after hearing the story, said, "This is beyond my control. You should go to the qazi, judge, for justice." The widow, desperate, replied, "I don't know anyone, but please help me. I will do anything to get justice for my daughter." The leader gave her the qazi's address, and she rushed there. Upon hearing the widow's story, the qazi told her, "To investigate this matter, you'll need to provide some money." The widow responded, "Don't worry about money. I will bring whatever amount you need. I just want justice for my daughter." She gathered all the money she could, including gold jewelry and some of her late husband's savings, and gave it to the qazi. The qazi then summoned the imam to court. The imam, shocked and frightened, could never have imagined that this poor widow would bring him to court. He had always considered himself beyond reproach. The whole village had respected him, but now a poor widowed woman had taken him to court. People in the village were outraged. "The girl is already dead. Why are we making such a big deal out of this? The imam is a good man, a respected scholar," they said. Where did this woman get the money to bring this case? Maybe she's been stealing. Despite the harsh gossip, the widow remained focused. She wanted justice, and she ignored all the judgment and whispers. She continued to go to the Qazi's court, but every time the imam didn't show up, the case was postponed again and again. 6 months passed. Every month she received an amount of money, but eventually everything she owned was sold. Now she had nothing left. She spent her nights crying, praying to Allah, sitting in prayer, talking to her Lord. She would say, "Oh Allah, if only my mind had been clear enough to recognize that cruel face of the imam. If only I had been wise enough to keep an eye on my daughter's actions, maybe today she would be here with me. Now my world has fallen apart, and I don't know if I will ever find a human in this world again." The next day the widow went to the Qazi. He said, "The time has come. I will ensure that this imam gets punished, but you must give me double the amount for that." The widow paused for a moment, because now she had nothing left except her house. The Qazi reassured her, "Don't worry, he will definitely be hanged. I will make sure of it. Just give me the double amount and watch how quickly justice is done. You'll see how this imam will be dragged to court and his head will be placed at your feet." The widow felt a sense of relief upon hearing these words. She agreed and said, "Fine, I'll bring you the money tomorrow." The Qazi was pleased. He knew that this simple woman would fall for his words. That very day, the widow sold her house to the village leader and took the money directly to the Qazi. The Qazi took the money and told her, "Now wait for the morning. You will hear very good news." The widow, feeling some peace, went back home, thinking that tomorrow the beast of a man would be hanged. But the next day passed quietly, and the following days also came and went. Desperate, the widow went to the Qazi's house again. The watchman stopped her and said, "Madam, the Qazi is not here. He has gone on a trip with his family to another area, and he won't be back for 2 months." The widow was furious. She stormed to the village leader's house and told him everything. The leader looked at her with strange eyes and said, "You stopped the case long ago. Your signature is on the documents. You mistakenly accused the imam, and then you withdrew the case. That's why your case is closed." Hearing this, the widow felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. Just then, a servant arrived and shoved her out of the house. She fell to the ground, crying bitterly. "This law is only for the rich. For the poor, all the rules are made to be broken," she muttered angrily. She stood up and said, "You didn't do justice to me, but I will bring justice for my daughter. I will deliver it myself." The widow, filled with rage, went straight to the imam's house. The door was open, and she entered, her anger boiling. The imam's wife was not home. The imam, seeing her, was startled because she was furious and holding a knife in her hand. The widow, with the fury of a lioness, attacked the imam. He grabbed her hand and slapped her hard across the face, but she didn't back down. She kept shouting, "You killed my daughter. You are not a human, you are a beast. You pretend to be an angel in front of others, but Allah didn't bless you with children, and you will remain childless." With these words, the widow stabbed the imam in the arm. Blood started pouring from his wound. The imam, enraged, began slapping her with all his strength. He grabbed the knife and struck her on the head. She was covered in blood. The widow, weak and helpless, tried to defend herself, but the imam, like a beast, did to her what he had done to her daughter. He assaulted her, leaving her lifeless body thrown outside like a worthless object. She was unconscious, but when she regained consciousness, her mind had completely shattered. She no longer had any sense of reality. The grief of her daughter's death, her poverty, and her humiliation in the court had taken everything from her. Her possessions were gone, and now she was insane. After her death, the pain and grief of the widow echoed in every corner of the village. She would go from house to house, banging on doors, crying, "You didn't give me justice. My daughter is dead, and none of you helped me. Now Allah will bring me justice." At first, people would feel guilty and give her food, pitying her. But as time passed, her curses and cries became so frequent that the villagers couldn't tolerate it anymore. They began throwing stones at her. Hungry and thirsty, the widow wandered the streets, her soul in agony with every step she took. One day, she was found dead near a pile of garbage. The villagers, feeling some sympathy, buried her. But her curses and laments were still lingering in the air. and they would soon affect the fate of the villagers. The imam showed no remorse for her death, continuing to indulge in his sinful ways. Meanwhile, the villagers who witnessed the events were left with fear in their hearts. When the widow was buried and the villagers returned to their homes, an extremely strange and severe earthquake struck the village. The ground started shaking, the walls of the houses began to crack, and people rushed out of their homes in panic. The earthquake was so intense that people, helpless, began reciting Allah's name. During this, a loud sound came from the imam's house. People quickly ran towards the source of the noise. When they reached the imam's house, they were horrified. A terrifying crack had appeared in the house, and the imam's body was gone, except for his face, which had now transformed into that of a dog. Upon seeing this, the people's condition worsened, and they began calling out to each other, asking for Allah's forgiveness. Some tried to approach the imam's house, but as they got closer, the crack in the earth widened, filling with blood. In a few moments, the imam's face also disappeared, and the crack closed. This scene was a clear sign for the villagers that this was the result of the widow's curse, and Allah's wrath had descended upon the imam. The villagers understood that the imam had truly committed a sin with that innocent girl, and that was the reason for this punishment. The imam, who appeared to be a representative of Allah during the day, was involved in unholy deeds at night, but he could not escape Allah's punishment. This event was recorded in Mecca, and many people witnessed it. The villagers learned that one should never oppress others, and that it is better to repent from sins than face Allah's wrath. They also learned to avoid people like the imam and to be cautious in raising their children. This event taught them that the sanctity of humanity and the law of Allah should always come first. We must treat our children well so that they can listen to their conscience and never become involved in any inappropriate behavior. May Allah protect us and our children and keep us safe from sins. This incident was a lesson that Allah showed to all the people. When the villagers witnessed the imam's death with their own eyes, their hearts were filled with fear of Allah's punishment. After the earthquake ended, a deep silence fell over the village, and people returned to their homes, repenting before Allah. They realized that Allah's punishment was inevitable, and there was no escape from it. The widow's curse, which had become a harsh reality, had now become a sign for the village. After denying the imam's actions, the villagers' hearts were strengthened by the greatness of Allah and His justice. Now everyone in the village understood the need for change in their lives. Each person began trying to improve themselves and follow the path of Allah. The children, remembering the imam's face, always treated their teachers with respect, and the parents became more cautious in the upbringing of their children. This event became a lesson not just for the people of the village, but for the entire community, showing that walking on the path of Allah is the ultimate success, and the end of oppressors is always bad. To learn more such Islamic lessons, subscribe to our channel. Thank you.